What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Scratch Agency podcast, hosted by Scratch Agents for Scratch Agents. My name is Stephen Turnbull, founder of T5 Insurance Services in Clinton, New York, and I'm joined by my co-host today, the one and all, you already know, hold your applause, Mr. Shawn Fitzgerald, founder of Sound Harbor Insurance in Long Island, New York. Ladies and gentlemen, this show is brought to you by Hawksoft, your family-owned and operated agency management system serving independent agencies with teams from 1 to 300 plus employees. Chris, an agency owner out of Connecticut, is a customer of Hawksoft because they believe in agents and are a family-owned and operated company. Something we've heard multiple times when talking about Hawksoft. Mr. Fitzgerald, how are we doing today,
Great
sir?
day, great day. Excited to talk to Kevin about some workers' comp stuff. I feel like we don't talk commercial enough on the podcast, so I'm sure we'll get a good dose today talking to Kevin.
Yeah, super excited for the conversation. As always, we're going to jump right into it. Today, we're super grateful to have Mr. Kevin Ring on the show. He's the Chief Experience Mod Officer with Emerge Apps and also the lead workers' compensation analyst for the Institute of WorkComp Professionals. Kevin, thanks for joining us today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you taking the time. I know I gave a little brief intro there, but just for people that are listening and maybe learning about you for the first time, if you don't mind giving us an introduction, how you got in the industry and workers' comp specific, and then I know Shawn and I wanted to hit a few points.
Yeah. So like a lot of people in our business, I got into insurance quite accidentally. Um, I met my wife in 1998, and her father is Preston Diamond, who was a very long time agency owner and consultant in our industry. And when the Institute started in 2001, I was actually working in IT at a mid-sized manufacturing company just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. And over the first, 18 months or so of the Institute's operation, it's largely working off of a spreadsheet. And eventually, press came to me and said, we could really use somebody who could help us build some systems because it seems like this thing is going to stick. And so that was how I started with the Institute. Was the guy responsible for building the CRM and doing that kind of stuff. But Preston also made me get my insurance license before I could take the job, which I thought was kind of strange, but it's not that hard to do, especially not 20 plus years ago. And so I did that. And then part of my role also was going to workshops, because back in those days, there were no Zoom workshops or that kind of thing. Everything was in person. And so over time, I started to absorb a lot of what the Institute was teaching just by osmosis. And after a couple years, they started handing me questions that clients would send in and say, hey, you go research this so that then we can take that and reply. And then around 2008, there were some changes in the business, and I got thrown into the front of the room. And I think that I'm a pretty good testimonial to the idea that if you decide that you want to be really good at something, if you put in the time and effort, you don't need any particular special skills to be good at it.
Mm. Yeah, I know Shawn and I want to talk about some specific topics specifically for our listeners, but could you give us a high level of what does the Institute do for agents? Who do you guys serve, and what should we know about it as agency owners?
Yeah, so we train, certify, and mentor independent agents in a workers' comp process that helps them write more business and get better results for their clients by leading with workers' comp. And so for producers, we have the Certified Work Comp Advisor designation. We also have the Certified Work Comp Specialist for account managers so that they know and understand the process that you're implementing and are in a position to support that. But the big thing that sets us apart from the many other excellent designation programs in our industry is that we believe that the designation is not the finish line, right? The finish line is you becoming an expert in workers' compensation, and expertise is not born in the classroom. And that's not a comment about our program. I think that's just a comment about life. And so what that means in practical terms is that folks who are members of the Institute have unlimited access to our team of experts here at the Institute, whether it's sending us a mod worksheet and loss runs and discussing either whether it's a prospective client or a current client, and looking for opportunities to advance the sale or put in exit barriers, or literally 10 minutes before we jumped on this call, I was talking to an advisor who has kind of a weird issue with one of his clients that has multiple operations, and one of them's in a PEO, and they're having issues with certificates, and he was trying to figure out how he could engineer his way around that without basically telling the client that you either need to suck it up or leave the PEO. And so that's where we spend the bulk of our time is supporting the folks who have been through the program, because insurance in general and workers' comp specifically, you have the rules, and it's great to have knowledge of those rules, but where the rubber meets the road, to use a bad cliche, is in the specific details of each client's situation, and understanding how the rules apply in that situation, and that's
Kevin,
what we do.
What would I think it's great. I'm glad that you mentioned the two programs in the beginning, the certified workers' comp specialist for, you said that was for account managers, and then there was a producer one.
Account managers.
For somebody that's not in commercial, maybe they're looking to get into it, or they do it on a real small level and they want to get more advanced. What would you recommend for them to do as like the first step if they want to learn about comp? Would it be those two programs specifically?
Well, yeah, I mean, for producers, it would be the certified work comp advisor, and I would say, not writing commercial and wanting to. Like, if you want to, that's great, but it's also about what kind of commercial do you want to write, because it's everybody. Every business you want to work with has to buy workers' comp, and in a lot of states like New York, literally everybody has to buy workers' comp. But like for us at the Institute, our workers' comp premium is right around $900. And I can tell you that our audit process works for us, because we use the process that we teach in the workshop to do our workers' comp audit. But I also know that if our agent got involved in that in any way, they'll have lost money on the account, just from one phone call, right? So you got to be working with accounts. We generally talk about a range of somewhere between 20 and 300 employees, 20 at the low end. That number used to be 10 before rates got so low, because you can find, a smaller, high rate employer that's generating enough revenue. And it's not that the process doesn't work when you get north of 300 employees, but that's the size company where it's a lot more likely you're going to see somebody that's wearing a workers' comp hat more than just a couple of days a year. And so it just becomes a more complicated sale. But and the revenue floor varies from agency to agency, and certainly varies by geography, but certainly comp accounts 2,500 in revenue plus is probably the sweet spot. So yeah, if you are writing or you want to write those kinds of accounts,
which makes total sense, because any commercial account I've ever spoken to that's let's just call it 1,000 in revenue or less, generally either has zero idea about the experience mod, or they're just not even, they don't think it's worth their time to put in to learn about it, to save the extra percentage points, on their policy if it's like a small one location shop, So it's
right. And they probably don't have enough frequency or, the same kind of problems that larger employers have.
To make a big enough difference.
It doesn't move the needle.
Exactly. One thing I know Stephen and I definitely wanted to touch on was regardless of revenue size, what can agents, brokers do when there is a workers' comp claim? How can, besides the broker, telling them, taking down the notes and helping them call in the claim, what can that broker do to help make the claims process smoother on the workers' comp side? Now, I know every carrier might be different and harder to deal with, but in your experience, what do you see works best?
So I think a lot of that question comes from what the agent does before there's an injury, right? So first of all, does the employer have a process? And it's a great question to ask an employer when you're talking to them about their comp. It's like, when someone gets injured here, what happens? Right. And a lot of times you're just going to be met with a blank stare or a, what do you mean? But the employer needs to have a process. This is the person that you report the claim to, or this is the phone number you call. And these are some of these things also need to be communicated to employees prior to them suffering an injury, because one of the things that often gets lost when we are looking at loss runs and you're seeing these disembodied names is that the vast majority of people who get hurt at work have never filed a comp claim before. And they have no idea how the system works. They don't know that they don't have a deductible or a copay like they do on their health insurance. And they don't know, when they get hurt, who are they supposed to talk to? But who is the employee supposed to go to when they get hurt? In the vast majority of states, the employer has at least some degree of control, if not absolute control, over what doctor they go to. And far too few employers leverage that opportunity. And they often just say, oh man, I'm really sorry you got hurt. Go to the doctor and let us know. And so they either wind up going to, random urgent care, or their personal doctor, or the worst case, the emergency room. I broke my shoulder back in January, and I'm doing physical therapy for that right now. And I was talking to the folks in the clinic yesterday, and one of them, it came up that I dealt in workers' comp, and one of them said, oh yeah, I used to work in the emergency room, and we dealt with so many workers' comp claims. Well, if it doesn't involve lights and sirens, the emergency room isn't where they should be going, because it's for a wide variety of reasons. So are they going to a doctor that the employer is selected and the employer has communicated with? Because everybody knows that it's important to bring injured workers back to work after they get hurt. But if you just let the employee go to whatever doctor they want, and you make no effort to communicate with that doctor in any of the variety of ways that you can do that, well, the doctor might ask the employee, well, what do you do? Oh, I lift 50-pound boxes all day. Well, okay, you have a back strain. You're not going to be able to lift 50-pound boxes for at least 2 weeks. Bang, here's a 2-week out of work note. And it's an indemnity claim before the employee ever leaves their first doctor's appointment. Whereas if you have a relationship with a physician in their clinic, and you've communicated to them that, we have a recovery at work program, we have light duty jobs, so you just tell us what it is safe for the employee to do, and we will find them work. Well, then it's going to be an awful lot easier to get that employee back. And so there's a lot of support that agents can provide to their clients in terms of facilitating those physician relationships, because if you're implementing this process, then you've probably helped other clients do it in the same general area as the client you're working with now. And another thing that often gets overlooked when you have a process like this is that you have a very clear indication when something isn't going the way it should. And that's where a lot of employers get stuck, is that by the time they realize that things are kind of going off the rails, it's too late to pull it back. And when you have a process, and this is universally true, one of the values of having a process is that it, you know what success looks like. And therefore, when you're not getting that, it becomes very easy to identify. It's in a manufacturing process, when they're building a house. Like, no contractor says, "Oh, I'm going to build a house. Just dump me a bunch of lumber and nails, and I'll figure it out." Right? They know. First we need to, put in the footers, and then we're going to do the foundation, and then we're going to build from there. They don't start with the roof. But in workers' comp, that's often where employers are at, is that they don't have any idea what's supposed to happen. And so workers' comp happens to them instead of it being something they can control. And I think doing that, and yes, there's conversations that sometimes need to be had with the carrier. I was talking to an advisor in the last few weeks where the employer and the agent are both extremely convinced that a particular claim is fraudulent, and they're frustrated that the carrier doesn't seem to be taking that seriously, and they're dealing with what a lot of people deal with, which is the carrier. The way the carrier's behaving is basically, we'd rather pay this
and fight it
than deal with denying it and the lawsuit that's going to come from that.
Yeah.
And that's very frustrating. Yeah. But at the end of the day, when you buy insurance, one of the things you sign away is the right to control how claims get paid, right? And so those kind of things happen, but they happen way less frequently when the agent helps an employer build a strong process.
Yeah, Kevin, I love the question, when someone gets injured, what happens? Because I feel like that's going to lead to a great wedge in the sales process, right? If they say they don't have one, and you're dealing with a 2,500 plus revenue account, now you can talk to them how a return to work program, the doctor selection, why it's important to do this before a claim happens, and how that'll impact your mod and save you money in the long run. Because at the end of the day, like, when I first read into some of this stuff, I'm like, man, this is, as a business owner, like, this is a lot for them to take in, and they're going to assume, like, wow, this is going to put a lot more on my plate, and be kind of turned off by the idea. But I feel like if they can connect with, somebody like you, or that can help them understand how much of a difference that could make in the pricing because of the mod, that'll get them excited to want to actually, do the work to make those changes. Does that make sense?
Well, right. And the mod is an easy path into that, right? Because the first thing that all of us learned about sales is that we have to answer the question for the prospect of what's in it for me. Right. And no matter how low rates get, everybody's still mad about how much they're paying for workers' comp, even though everybody, so certainly adjusted for inflation, everybody is paying dramatically less than they were paying 10 years ago, per payroll. And so you can, and then you have a lot of contractors and people in the oil and gas business who have to keep their mod below a certain threshold to bid on jobs. And so you get them excited by how you can reduce their costs. But, it's also important that we remember that workers' comp impacts the entire business, because when someone gets hurt and they can't do their job, do you guys have any clients that are running around with just spare employees and they don't have enough work for all those people to do?
So there's a lot of soft costs that you can't just,
Right. So now, are we having to pay overtime? Are we having to get a temp employee? Are we delivering, products or jobs late? Are we having to put a less skilled employee, in a role that a more skilled employee was in? And so when someone gets hurt, yes, it costs money to the insurance company, which is then reflected on the mod, and then costs money in a very direct way back to the employer. But that injury also harms the productivity, and by extension, the profitability of the business. And then, you have the worst case scenario, which is that someone gets hurt and they wind up getting sucked into the workers' comp system and they never come back. And what's it going to cost you to replace that employee? Probably a lot more than what you were paying the person that got hurt. And so it all ties together, and more than probably any other type of insurance, you as agents can prove in dollars and cents that working with you is better than working with the 20 other agents that are calling and just saying, "Can I give you a quote?"
And Kevin, I think I don't want to dive too deep into the weeds, but I will. When you're explaining it to an insured and how it impacts the mod, right, and how that equates to savings, the soft costs that we mentioned, I know every state rates it differently, right? There's states that are, in NCCI versus ones that aren't, like New York pulled out a few years ago. But I do know that New York still has they call it like a split point, right? So if the claim pays out over a certain amount, then it impacts the mod. So I guess my question is, when you're explaining it to an insured, what do you think is the easiest way to explain it without just like overwhelming them, right? Because it's a lot to understand, and every state's completely different on how it's handled,
I mean, yes and no. So let me answer the first question, and then we'll talk about the differences. Gotcha. So the easiest thing to do is to get your hands on the experience mod, which you can do by getting a signed letter of authorization from the employer and then requesting it from the rating bureau.
Policy,
NCCI
right?
has risk. Well, you get the number from the policy, but you need the worksheet, which is going to have their payrolls and the individual.
So the worksheet's more accurate
because then, well, it's not more accurate. It has more information.
Gotcha.
It's like the difference between the one page your accountant sends you with like how much tax you owe versus your entire tax return that has all the information.
So it's like when you
right?
when you tell the client you need the deck page and they send you the ID card.
So you get the worksheet and then you plug it into a mod analysis tool like ModSure, and then what you can do is to show the employer that when Bob Smith got hurt and the insurance company paid $25,000, your experience mod went up this much, and it's costing you about X number of dollars because of that increase in the mod. And they don't need to understand the math, although while people get very intimidated by the math, there's no math on any experience mod worksheet that has anything on there that you didn't learn how to do in elementary school, right? It's addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. But that's not, the employer doesn't need to know that. What they need to know is that if Bob hadn't gotten hurt, your mod would be X number of points lower, and your premium would have been, about X number of dollars less. And then once they understand that, then they can get more excited about doing the work and putting in the time to build a better process. And then with the different jurisdictions and their different, experience rating calculations, the fundamental purpose of the experience mod doesn't change, right? And the concept of experience rating extends far beyond workers' comp. It's just that in workers' comp, it's very transparent, right? You can get this document that shows you exactly how it's calculated. And while there are different methods for calculating the mod, there are a few universal truths. One is that 1.0 is the average mod, right? That's true in every state, regardless of jurisdiction. Every business has a minimum mod, the lowest, like what their mod would have been if they had 0 injuries during the period of time that's covered on the mod. Every jurisdiction that uses experience rating, with the exception of Ohio, which is a monopolistic state, and they use 4 years in their mod instead of 3, the method of figuring out what policies go on the mod is the same, which is typically, but not always, not the most recent, but the 3 prior. It can get a little bit more complicated when you start changing effective dates or you have multiple entities with different effective dates on the mod. And so the mechanism changes, and New York left because their actuaries felt that they had a different approach than NCCI that would work better for New York. And so they decided to bail on NCCI and do their own thing. And as I was saying before we started, New York's experience rating plan is very, very similar in structure to California and Delaware and Pennsylvania. Delaware has had this kind of structure for over 20 years. New York and California and Pennsylvania have all picked it up in the last 3 or 4. And if it works for them, great. The only real complication that it introduces for agents is when you have a multi-state employer. Say you've got a New York employer that operates in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. You might have 3 different experience mods. One from the Mass Bureau, one from New York, and one from Pennsylvania that each apply to the exposure in each of those states. But it's different, but the function and the basic mechanisms are the same.
I love that. So Kevin, the worksheet, the mod tool, I love that. So start with the question when someone gets hurt, what happens? The great wedge. Then you could show them the worksheet, what the actual savings would be if Bob returned to work with light duty versus being out for 3 months or whatever the case was.
Right.
And then the minimum mod, I just wanted to ask you on that. Is that, I guess when you run the mod tool, would that say, hey, for this specific class in this state, this is what the minimum mod is and how to achieve it? Because I feel like that would be another wedge too.
So the minimum, it's a huge deal. And yes, mod software will answer that question for you. I'm 97% sure, but my mental picture is a little fuzzy at the moment, that the New York worksheet actually has that number on there. Like, you don't have to do any math. It just tells you. It's probably labeled loss-free rating. I know that Pennsylvania, Delaware, and California all list that number right on the worksheet. On an NCCI worksheet, you can calculate the minimum mod by taking the stabilizing value and dividing it by the total in box K on the first page of the worksheet. And so, I said before, the average mod is 1.0.
Yeah.
That is true everywhere. And if you think about the mod as a report card, when you got an average grade in school, what grade did you get?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You got a C, right? So a lot of business owners and agents, to be fair, have a very binary view of the mod, which is that above 1 bad, below 1 good. But certainly below 1 is better than above 1. But
there's room for improvement.
If 1 is a C, then what's the A plus? Well, that's your minimum mod. And when they realize where they can get to, if you've got somebody that has a 95 mod and their minimum is 60,
huge deal.
Well, how much more capital could they unlock in their business to deploy in some way other than giving that money to the insurance?
Is there does the tool, or is there a resource that shows how to achieve the minimum? Like, is it, because I know sometimes it's based off payroll, years in business, stuff like that. So, like, is there a way to achieve
the minimum? The minimum is going to be based on your class codes, the payroll attached to those, and ultimately it's about expected losses, right? So the higher your expected losses go, the lower your minimum mod is generally going to be. But how do you get it? The answer to that is quite simple, and that is, your minimum mod is what your mod would be if you had 0 injuries over the period of time that's covered on the mod, right? And having 0 injuries is, a much larger conversation. But you don't even have, the goal, of course, is improvement, right? And every business always wants to improve. Um, and if you're and the mod is a lagging indicator, so you as an agent can't walk in and say your mod is at the minimum, right? Like just make it so. It's going to take time. Even if they magically improve immediately today, it's going to take time for that improvement to be reflected on the mod. And but when you can say, well, when we started working together 5 years ago, you were at a 125, and today you're at a 75 because of the work that we've, done together to help you improve. Well, then you can show that you turn your promises into performance, and you can monetize that, right? You can monetize why working with you is different and better than working with your competition, who just says I can get you a lower price. And that also puts in exit barriers, because if you aren't and this is true across everything that you do, and I think it's just easier to do in workers' comp, that if you aren't consistently finding ways to remind your clients that working with you is dramatically different than working with your competition, then it becomes very easy and even logical for them to take that call saying, hey, can I give you a quote?
Because relationship.
Right. And that's another reason that you want to work with, a little bit larger businesses, because they're much more likely to appreciate the results that you're able to create. And I'm very intentionally not using the word value. Right. It's results. It's you were in this state and we've helped you get to this better state. And this is why you are better off as a result.
Yeah. Kevin, I want to wrap up here for time with this last question. I think you can tell already who on this call does more commercial than the other. I've just been sitting back taking notes, and I can see Shawn's feet moving below him there. But to wrap this up, if you could talk to, I think a lot of our listeners are scratch agency owners or agency owners that are, or agents, producers that are thinking of going scratch. And if you could talk to the people that listen to this whole conversation and all of that great information are like, okay, I got to get more involved in this. I have to get more educated in this. Where do I start?
Where do you start? You could, there's a lot of great information out there available, largely for free. A lot of great stuff on YouTube, podcasts like yours that are out there and talk about workers' comp, both featuring me, and there's a lot of stuff out there, featuring people that are, out in the world doing a lot of what we teach. And what I would focus on is what you can do in the agency to help your clients. I'm part of some groups on LinkedIn about workers' comp, and they drive me nuts because I feel like they're always talking about, super sophisticated, like inside baseball industry stuff. And it's not that that's not important. Like, it's important to know, are carriers profitable on comp, because that, impacts the rate environment. Like that's important information, but it's not important to you, right? Because you don't get any say in how they set the rates. And so focus in on little things that you can help your clients with. Even with smaller clients, understanding what money and substitutes for money that an employer might give their employees that doesn't count on the premium audit, because 75% or more of premium audits are incorrect, and the majority of those errors are the result of an employer not keeping the records they need to keep to make sure that their audit is what it is. Very much like if you make a charitable donation and you don't get a receipt, you can't deduct it from your taxes. so then you're going to pay more tax than you should. Looking into the rules in your state about directing care and how employers can take control of that. Sometimes the employer can just say you're going to this doctor. Other times you have to have a network set up, which the insurance company will generally handle. And when you get more sophisticated, you may want to create your own, because the insurance company's doctors aren't always the best choice. So focus in on little things that you can do to help your clients, and then when you're ready to really dive into it, then give us a call.
Love it. Really good. We've done, I got to say something here. I think we're like 170 episodes or something. This was one of the best ones from the standpoint, Kevin, of just tangible action items and things that, like, I know I got a page of notes here, and I'm going to go back and listen to it 2 or 3 times, because there was just so much there of like explaining it down to any level that you are. So I really appreciate the way that you answer the questions and explain that stuff. That was just super good. Kevin, anybody that's at the end of this now and like, hey, I got to get in touch with Kevin, what's the best way to get in touch with you, follow along what you're doing, all that good stuff?
So you can check out our website at workcompprofessionals.com, or you can just Google Institute of WorkComp Professionals. You can send me an email. It's kevin@workcompprofessionals.com. They can also see my calendar and just set up a time for us to chat at schedulewithiwcp.com. But there's a lot of great information on the website in terms of how we work, how membership in the Institute works and what that looks like. And there's also a lot of articles that we've written over time that talk about different work comp topics. And to your point about how I was explaining things, and I'm sorry to extend the podcast, but another thing that I think we think is really important, whether we're talking about workers' comp or anything else in insurance, is to always remember that whether it's business or personal lines, your clients don't work in this industry. And it's very easy for us to get tied up in all of the insurance mumbo jumbo, but focus in all of your client-facing work in speaking the client's language, right? Explain things in ways that make sense to them. And even if we go like to the cost of those injuries, like your mod would be this much lower and it would save you this much money. Well, can you turn that around and maybe you have some idea of what their profit margin is. It's like you would have to make this number of widgets to pay for this injury. You would have to close, this many deals. You'd have to put roofs on this many houses, right? Because they maybe even more than the dollars, right? That connects with them.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
So good. So good. Kevin, thanks for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Everybody.
Absolutely.
That's another episode of the Scratch Agency Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Do us a favor, like the show, share the show, and subscribe. Most importantly, remember to dig down deep, believe in yourself, and own your own future. We'll see you next week. Take care.